Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video where we're going to be going through the CFI lesson plans, the PTS, and again, just a little prerequisite. This is me putting myself practicing out online, so you guys are welcome to practice along, but just a disclaimer, there's potential for things to be incorrect, and I always welcome you guys to give me feedback and comments down in the section or in the comments below. So if you guys have anything you want to say, anything I left off, any tips, maybe any CFIs who are out there watching this, any advice you guys may have, be sure to leave those comments in the comments below. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. Well, welcome back, guys. Today, we're going to be taking a dive into instructor responsibilities and professionalism. And I think this is a very important lesson, not only because it's required, part of the CFI Checkride, it's the required task area, but it's just an important aspect of being a professional and having that professional appearance as an instructor when we're teaching our students. You know, flight instruction is a very expensive profession. It's a very expensive hobby to pursue. So we want to make sure we're providing great instruction for our students and just maintaining a professional atmosphere and posture as an instructor. So let's just dive right into it. We'll start off with some responsibilities as an aviation instructor. So you got a couple of responsibilities we want to keep in mind. First one is pretty obvious, but we want to help learners. We want to make sure that they're having a good time while learning. Learning about flight instruction and learning how to fly, it should be fun. It's a fun experience, and we want to emphasize that with our students. We don't want them to be having a dull time while they're learning. We want them to be enjoying themselves. So we should make learning fun and enjoyable during flight instruction. We can also provide adequate instruction. We talked about this right at the beginning, but people pay a lot of money for flight instruction. So we want to make sure we are giving them good, adequate instruction. We want to show that we know what we're talking about. We're not coming to our lessons unprepared. We want to have just our material ready and actually show that we care that we're teaching to these students. We can do this by effectively analyzing our students and getting to know them. We talked a little bit about this in the previous video. It's important for us to build those relationships with those students, and we can analyze their personality and their goals, why they want to do this flight instruction. Are they going to be a big shot airline pilot one day, or are they just doing it for fun? When we understand that, we can more effectively teach to them and communicate with them. So if we incorrectly analyze a learner, it may result in bad or just not good instruction. So it's important for us to analyze our learners and build good relationships with them. So learners experiencing slow progress may be due to discouragement or lack of confidence. So we want to encourage our students, make sure they're real confident in what they're doing. Be sure to give them good praise when they're doing well and encourage them through their flight instruction. Maybe some lessons are a little more complex and students are kind of having a hard time getting through that. If a lesson is too complex for a student, break it down into simple steps. When we can simply lay it out step by step for students and they can visualize it a little bit easier, it becomes a lot less frustrating for them trying to work through something. So sometimes we might deal with fast learners. Fast learners, they want to just go all the way through, or maybe they're not even making mistakes. They're not even seeing the point of the mistakes because they're just picking up stuff so quickly. So we want to make sure with fast learners, we kind of reel them in and make sure we don't skip over mistakes with them and make sure they understand that mistakes are bound to happen and we shouldn't ignore them and we should pay attention to them and make sure we can learn from them. And if a learner is learning at a very fast pace and picking stuff up quickly, raise the standard, push them to do better and achieve a higher level. Make sure when they try to achieve that higher level and they're having to focus in because you're raising the standards, it'll kind of reel them back and get them more back on track with the lesson and where you want them to progress. So with instruction, we also want to have standards of performance. And what that means is we want to make sure we have a certain level we want learners to achieve to. And it's nice that we have a great thing from the FAA to kind of outline what exactly private pilots and commercial pilots need to obtain. It's called the ACS. And that is a perfect set of standards that we can teach and try to get our students to attain to before they go take their check ride. I love this statement. I want to read this out for you from my lesson plans. Instructors fail to provide competent instruction when they permit their learners to get by with substandard performance. So the standards exist for a reason, and we want to make sure that we're actually teaching our students to reach those standards. If a student's not reaching the standards set forth by the ACS, your syllabus, whatever it may be, they're not ready. You shouldn't be signing them off to go take a check ride if they can't properly do a steep turn within limits, or if they're not making their short field approach within limits. You want to make sure they're actually reaching the standards that they're supposed to achieve. So it's very important that us as instructors make sure we teach and help them achieve that level of achieve a standard of performance. We want to emphasize the positive. It's very important that a lot of students respond well to positive feedback. So when a student does something well, be sure to encourage them and be like, hey, you did that really good. Great job. When you're emphasizing the positive, it creates a more memorable moment for the student, and that's going to stick with them. So emphasize the positive, because positive instruction results in positive learning. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Minimize learner frustration. So this is very simple. We want to motivate our learners. You don't want them to be frustrated. However, if you think about when you've gone through flight training or when you're doing anything that you want to learn, when you get frustrated, it's very hard to learn and continue to do it, because all you can think about is how frustrated you are. So we can do this by encouraging learners and make sure they see the benefit and the enjoyment out of flying. Just kind of remind them why they're doing what they're doing. And it all comes back to building those great relationships with the students. Keep your learners informed. So as you're progressing through your syllabus and progressing through their training, keep them on track and keep them informed of where they're at. If they have a good understanding where they're at, it's going to kind of keep their mind on track of where they're at, and it will keep them not asking questions. How frustrating would it be if your instructor just never told you how you were doing or where you were at? You had no idea when your solo was going to come up. You had no idea when your check ride was going to be. It'd be so frustrating not knowing where you're at. So always make sure you keep I almost said instructors, keep the students and learners up to date of where they're at. Give them an overview of the course from the beginning and keep them posted on the progress. When they can kind of see a whole outline from the beginning of where they're at and where they're going, they have a better idea of where they can work through. And make sure, of course, if you're going to give them like tests, quizzes, or exams, you give them good notice. Don't just throw them up on them on the last second, unless you're trying to intentionally test them and see where they're at. Maybe do a little pop quiz just to kind of test what they learned for the day. But if it's like something like a solo quiz, kind of keep them informed when that's coming up. Approach learners as individuals. We talked about this. Always about building those great relationships. When you can understand why they're doing what they're doing, why they want to go through flight training, you can better teach to them and adapt to their style and their personality. We want to teach them as individuals because everyone learns differently and everyone grows differently. So we want to make sure we're teaching to the individual person and not just teaching blankly as a whole to random group, I should say. Give credit when credit is due. We want to make sure, kind of going back to emphasizing the positive, when they do something well, give them credit and praise them for that. But praise pays dividends, but when given too freely, it becomes valueless. So we want to make sure we give them credit when they do well, but if they don't do something well and they need to work on it, we're not just praising them just for the sake of praising them. We want to make sure we give it considerably, but when considerably, there's a word for it. I can't think of it. We want to make sure we give it generously. There's the word. Give praise generously when it's deserved, where credit is due, but don't just praise them just for the sake of praising them. Criticize constructively, kind of feeding off of that. We want to make sure if a student makes a mistake, we give them clear criticism of what they did wrong and how they can improve it. If we just tell a student they did something wrong and don't tell them how to improve, it's going to be frustrating. They're going to be like, all right, I did something wrong. Well, how do I fix it? Don't just tell me I did it wrong. Help me fix it. So that's a great thing. Criticize constructively. Make sure they identify their mistakes and failures and help them learn what they did wrong and move forward from it. And be consistent. We don't want to just give criticism one day and just slam a student, and then the next day they make a small mistake and we're like, whatever. We want to be consistent with our students. Be criticized the same way you criticize every single day, so they're not feeling like you're slamming them one day and praising them for mistakes the next day. So be consistent with the way you criticize and praise them. Admit errors. I'm not perfect. I don't think any instructor would ever admit they're perfect. We're going to make mistakes, but we want to make sure that students understand that we will make mistakes, and it's a great learning opportunity. My favorite example is just recently in the news, there was a big story about a American Airlines plane that crossed a runway at JFK in front of a Delta plane. That's a 777 pilot. That pilot's probably very senior and has thousands and thousands of hours under his belt. Someone even at that level can make mistakes, and that's proof of that. So we want to make sure we can admit that we're not perfect and help our learners see that, but we can also learn from them. And of course, if you don't know something, don't hide the fact that you don't know it. Admit that you don't know it, but try to show the student that you can find out the answer or where to locate the answer. And of course, the last one is just be well prepared. We want to make sure we're prepared coming into a lesson. If we just show up and we're just like, all right, what are we doing today? Where are you at? I don't know. We could work on this today. Student's going to take that you don't care. So we want to show initiative and come prepared what we're going to do with the student and come with our materials, come with our lesson plans, whatever we need for the lesson that day, just come well prepared. So those are some of the aviation instructor responsibilities. Let's talk about flight instructor responsibilities. So we want to make sure psychological obstacles for flight and learners. Let's talk about that. You don't want to ignore negative factors. So if a student has a fear of planes or maybe they get motion sick or something like that, we don't want to ignore that. We want to make sure we can acknowledge that and address that with the student. Negative sensations can often be overcome by understanding. So if a student maybe is afraid of small planes and they feel like there's just a lot of rocky and stuff, you can be like, well, that's just the wind and it's not truly as bad. We're not going to fall out of the sky. Oh, okay. When they understand stuff like that, it helps them kind of overcome maybe their feeling of uneasiness or fear. So we want to make sure the students feel safe and secure when they're coming in to do flight instruction. Ensuring learner skill set, or formally titled Ensure Student Ability. Flight instructors have the responsibility to provide guidance and restraint with respect to solo ups. So this kind of goes back to the standards. We want to make sure we don't just sign off a student for something when they're not ready. We want to make sure they are absolutely ready when we sign them off to do something. So the example my instructor gave me is, how do you know when a student's ready? When you don't got to say anything or do anything. If you've been practicing with a student in the pattern and they're just nailing those touch and goes, they're nailing the radio calls, and you're just sitting there just like, I don't got to do nothing. They're doing it all. They're ready for the solo. So that's a great way to kind of tell when a student's ready. But obviously, again, don't sign them off or don't put them in a position when you haven't properly prepared them. Professionalism. We as instructors, we are teachers. We are teachers. I like to think of us just like college professors. You're paying a lot of money to go to college, and those professors make good money. Flight instructors, give or take, maybe not. But you want to maintain a professional atmosphere. When a student sees someone who acts professional, it gives off the sense that they know what they're talking about. It makes a sense of respect. They're going to respect you because they feel like you belong in the position you are in. So I'm just going to go through it. I have a little chart here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just want to give you a couple instructor do's and don'ts, and we might kind of talk about these later on. But some instructor do's and don'ts. Sincerity. We'll talk about that in a minute, so I'll kind of skip over that. Be sincere. Avoid profanity. Minimize learner frustration. Motivate the learner. Be consistent. Admit errors. We kind of talked a little bit about these, and some of these will repeat, but those are some good instructor do's. Let's talk about some stuff you probably shouldn't do. Ridicule the learner. You shouldn't be just ridiculing your student because they're not doing well. That's not going to help. Model irresponsible flight behavior. So if I just get in and I never do my checklist or anything like that, the student's going to see that. It's not going to look good. So I want to make sure we're not modeling irresponsible flight behaviors. Disrespect the learner. That kind of goes to the ridiculing. Don't disrespect them. And then, of course, don't set the learner up for failure. We want to see them succeed. So don't put them in a position to where they're intentionally going to fail. So let's kind of go through some of these. We'll get a little more in depth. Sincerity. Do not hide inadequacy behind a smokescreen or unrelated instruction. Just be sincere. Be upfront. Students want to see your honesty. If you don't know, be honest. And make sure they understand no one's perfect. Be sincere. When they see you're honest and upfront, they're going to have a much more level of respect for you, and they're also going to understand you better as well. Acceptance of the learner. We need to not only make sure we accept the learner, but the learner accepts us as instructors. We can do so by, under no circumstance should the instructor do something which implies degrading the learner. So this kind of talks about what we talked about earlier, not degrading them, not insulting them, making them feel welcome. We want them to feel like they accept our instruction. We want them to feel they belong. Personal appearance and habits. Like I said, we're professional. We want to maintain a good appearance as we show up to flight instruction. I shouldn't be showing up to a lesson in just a t-shirt and sweatpants, acting like I don't care, maybe smelling like I haven't showered in a couple days. I want to have a good professional attitude and appearance that shows I desire to be here and I care about being here. So it's common courtesy, honestly. That's all it is. A rude, thoughtless, inattentive instructor cannot hold someone's respect. So when we maintain that way that we care for ourselves and care for the way we look, the way we smell, all that kind of stuff, it really just shows the learner that we care and we want to be there and have a professional attitude or appearance. Demeanor, this is kind of a good one. You want to make sure we're not coming across like a jerk, essentially. We want to come across as a welcoming instructor that we appear to know what we're talking about. Maybe sometimes we don't. We just want to have a calm, thoughtful, and disciplined, but not essentially a somber or not somber demeanor. So just being a very welcoming environment, talking about how we know what we're teaching and have confidence in what we're teaching, but also making the student not feel terrified to come to us, he ask questions or whatever. We want to create a welcoming environment with our demeanor. All right, we talked about proper language. Just, don't be swearing or anything like that in the plane. You just want to have that normal, without inhibitions. I can't talk. And just speak positively. That's a big thing. Speak positively with the students. Don't degrade them or insult them. All right, evaluation of a learner's ability. Demonstrating ability. We want to make sure that learners can demonstrate their ability to a standard. And we talked about this earlier. We got the PTS, the ACS, or maybe your syllabus. We want to make sure that they are actually performing to those standards. Nothing more. Well, more would be great. Nothing less. We want to make sure students are performing to that standard. Keeping the learner informed. We talked about that earlier as well. Just keep them up to date with what's going on, where they're at. Give them plenty of heads up when stuff's coming up. Maybe be like, hey, you're doing great. We still need to work a little bit more on your flares, on your landings, but you're getting close to your solo. Keeping them just up to date of where they're at, what they need to work on, and kind of keep them up to date as they progress along with their instruction. Point out elements where deficiencies are believed to have originated. So that way when we point out deficiencies and kind of help them understand what caused the deficiency, it can really help them understand how they could properly correct it. So make sure you kindly point out deficiencies and help them understand where they might possibly be coming from. And then, of course, correction of learner errors. It's a good idea, actually, to let learners make mistakes within reason. Obviously, don't let them spiral into something that could be a safety concern. But errors are a great way for students to learn from their mistakes. So let them make a couple errors and then use them as teaching tools. Kind of creates that just impressionable memory in them to help them like, oh man, I made that mistake. I don't want to make that again. So let them make those mistakes and try to see if they can get out of those errors on their own. It's a great way for them to kind of diagnose and maybe work through ADM, which we can talk a little bit more about in a different lesson. Working through those mistakes or situations and try to work through them on their own and develop that good decision-making skills. All right, so that was kind of talking about how we can evaluate a learner's ability. Let's talk about exams and ways we can kind of test our students. So the first one's pretty obvious. It's the knowledge test. This is required for the students for commercial and private. They got to take a knowledge test or a written test beforehand. The instructor is also responsible for being accountable for deficiencies. So we want to make sure we're not signing off a student to go take a knowledge test if they don't know or if they haven't done very well. What my instructors did with me when I was going through my training is I had to bring back 3 practice tests with at least a 90. And at that point, my instructor knew I was ready and he'd sign me off. So make sure our students are ready before they go to take knowledge tests. Don't just sign them off just for the sake of signing them off. Almost lost the contact there, excuse me. Practical tests, kind of the same thing. The practical exams, the check rides, we don't want to sign students off to go take those practical tests if they aren't ready. If a student's doing great and everything, we're like, man, those steep turns, you're just really kind of losing some altitude, not holding it all that well, but everything else looks great, so I'll sign you off. Now, we want to make sure that students are getting everything to the PTS standards, to those standards that are set, nothing less. So don't sign students off to go do that beforehand. Just a keynote with that is instructors are held accountable for deficiencies in performance. Not only that, this is for me personally, you don't want to sign a student off not only to go fail a check ride, but also consider safety. I wouldn't want to sign off a student to go take a check ride have them possibly get their private pilot's license if they don't really properly know how to recover from a stall. Imagine what kind of conscience that would put on me if I knew my student didn't know how to do stall recoveries, and one day they tragically were killed in an accident because they didn't know how to recover from a stall. So not only just testing, but also from a personal conscious aspect, we want to make sure we're setting students up for safety and for them to pass their practical test. So don't sign them off until they have reached that standard during training, that set standard that they're supposed to achieve. Flight instructor endorsements, we just want, like, kind of going back with the same thing we just talked about, make sure we're signing things off appropriately, and not, the instructor is held accountable for all these things. So don't sign off students who aren't adequate with whatever you're signing them off for. It's a breach of faith with the learner. You don't want to sign them off if they're not ready. They're not going to trust you if you're signing them off just to set them up for failure. It goes back to one of the instructor's don'ts. Don't set a learner up for failure. And then finally, I think this is the last one. No, we got one more section, but finally in this section, additional training and endorsements, flight reviews, stuff like that. We're able to do flight reviews as instructors, and it's not really a test or a check ride. It's not like pass or fail. If it doesn't end up getting, the student doesn't do a good job, it just turns into training. That's all it is. But we can also sign off students or pilots for flight reviews and stuff like that, or checkouts for airplanes. So must be based on a specific set of objectives and standards, and same thing. Don't sign off if they're not reaching that set of standards and objectives. We want to make sure they're being safe and reaching those standards. All right. Same thing with instrument proficiency check, but we'll kind of ignore that because we're not instrument ready yet. We'll get there eventually. And then, of course, like I just mentioned, aircraft checkouts and transitions to high performance planes, same thing. Making sure they truly understand the training and reach that level and standards and objectives that we've set forth. Also, just got finishing off on that, don't sign off a student for an airplane you're not current in. If you're not current in, say I'm not current in a 172, I haven't flown a 172 in a year, I've been doing all my training in Pipers, don't sign a student off in it, because obviously if you aren't current in it, it's going to reflect badly on the training of the student if you're not current. All right, final thing we want to talk about with instructor responsibilities and professionalism is professional development. We want to make sure that we're just continuing our education as instructors. It doesn't just stop here as becoming a CFI. For myself personally, I love watching videos and just seeing cool content online about aviation, stuff like that. I feel like I'm constantly learning new things every day, whether it's from TikTok or YouTube. But maybe attending some FAA seminars, going to AOPA things, reading different articles, or maybe even trying to strive for that Gold Seal certificate as a CFI. Just continuing our training and continuing to strive for a higher level as an instructor to become the best possible pilot we can be, but also helping train others to become the best possible pilots they can be. So some good sources of material for that is obviously just keeping up with current flight regulations, the AIM, PTS, ACS, all that kind of stuff. Keeping up with AOPA, if you're not an AOPA member, that's a fantastic source to keep up to date with just great things that are changing in the industry with FAA and stuff like that, different regulations. So that's obviously a great thing to keep up with. But yeah, so just kind of continually just striving to become more knowledgeable and a better instructor and a better pilot throughout our years and continuation as a pilot. So that's pretty much it about regarding instructor responsibilities and professionalism. We kind of talked about what it means to help learners, some ways we can provide adequate instruction, being clear, concise, maybe breaking down complex lessons into simpler stuff. We talked about standards of performance and making sure that students, reach certain standards before we sign them off, and we're not signing them off and they're not being below what that standard is. We talked about minimizing learner frustration by motivating them and helping them achieve what they want to do through different elements in that aspect. We talked about what flight instructor responsibilities are, some psychological obstacles for flight learners that they might have to work through. We talked about ensuring their learner skill set. We also talked about professionalism. What's it mean to have a sense of professionalism, dressing appropriately, and stuff like that. And we also talked about how we can evaluate a learner's ability and testing them to a certain standard. We talked about aviation instructors and exams and testing ways. Then finally, we talked about the professional development and continuing our knowledge and skills and ability as a pilot or as a CFI. So that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm really enjoying doing this, and it's doing great for me to help kind of practice teaching these out. And like I said, if you guys have any comments or critique you'd like to leave in the comments below, please be sure to do that. I'm going to continue to upload these. You might have noticed we skipped from A to E. I'm probably not going to upload every single lesson because, one, time-wise, but also, two, these aren't technically my lesson plans, even though they are modified. But they are the backseat pilot's lesson plans, and I don't know if I feel really comfortable releasing every single task in a video format when it's their content. If that makes sense. I'll consider it, but we'll see. But kind of some of the more important ones will probably be the ones that get uploaded. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.